Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pro Tools Answers, where we discuss, demonstrate and elaborate on your Pro Tools questions put to us in the official Avid Pro Tools support forum in Facebook. My name is Dave Phillips, audio engineer and lecturer for Point Blank Music Schools in the UK, and joining me is Anders from Tonecraft Work in Austria and lecturer for Siegen University in Germany.
Hi.
And all the way over in Tokyo, we have Avid's audio curriculum manager, the master himself, Mr. Andy Hagerman.
Hello.
Okay, this one is going to be a really interesting one today, I hope. Because we're going to be dealing with a question from a dim eye piano guy, and we thought we'd answer in the form of a bit more of an exploration rather than sort of kind of directly answer. Well, it is going to directly answer the question, really. It involves Pro Tools as a MIDI product. Now, his question is this. Hey there, I'm currently evaluating Pro Tools after a couple of months of evaluating Cubase and Studio One for my personal non-commercial use. I'm a lifelong piano player and my wife and kids sing. I grew up on Korg's 01W... I grew up on Korg 01Ws, etc., making music. I'm interested in making music for myself and the family. To that end, most of my stuff would be done in the box, although I do play guitar and bass, so that stuff might be tracked. My question, I've read various places that MIDI in Pro Tools is subpar, and I've also heard that it's much improved. From Pro Tools Answers, he cites us directly. Yes, wow. but I've also heard that it is much improved. How is Pro Tools as far as MIDI in the context of using VSTI's editing, programming, etc.? He has a caveat. I'm a piano player, so most of what I would do would resemble the linear workflow of the 01Ws, etc. Actually playing in the parts and punching in the correct stuff, etc. Obviously, MIDI editing for quantizing and humanizing would also be good. I'm hoping for an honest dialogue.
You've come to the right place.
or rather, we've taken him to the right place. So this question and this subject comes up a lot, and in the answers, I find myself quite troubled in the language that people use and the overgeneralized responses. And what I mean by language is literally in its literal use, right? We're not talking about bad language or anything like that. It's the way that people describe it in a very, very general way. Now, the common narrative that I see is that Pro Tools is poor for MIDI, and that's what the poster references, and that usually goes that's usually as far as the description gets. Even when you Google Pro Tools MIDI, there's an answer that Google pulls in from a Sweetwater article that at first glance essentially says the same thing, that Pro Tools is subpar for MIDI. But on the odd occasion that I actually want to dedicate to some time drilling down into people's opinions, I either find that they actually don't know firsthand, they want a feature that they aren't aware is actually there, they don't know how to use it, or they're describing the behavior of a feature in a way that they don't, or the behavior of a feature that they don't connect with, but actually has a logical reason for behaving in such a way. And all of this seems to lead to the conclusion that Pro Tools is somehow rubbish for MIDI, and I don't think that's the case.
But isn't that a general problem with internet forums in the first place? People stating their opinions as if they were fact and not being able to back that up, and they can't even say right out that it's opinion, not fact.
Yeah, and
I'm not sure.
No, I think you're right, and that was the goal for putting Pro Tools Answers together in the first place, wasn't it?
But how could we answer that? We are only Pro Tools guys, right?
well, it's funny you mention that, Anders. So the reason that the three of us got together in the first place is because we're certified experts for Pro Tools. I certified all the way up to 310. Anders is certified in pretty much every Pro Tools pathway going.
Yeah, every instructor course there is basically.
And Andy didn't write the book on Pro Tools training, but as Avid's curriculum manager,
I've written some of them.
You oversaw the writing of all of Avid's training. So the point of setting Pro Tools Answers up was, if the three of us don't know the answer, it's going to be a very tricky one to get to. Right? That was certainly the original intention. And again, the point of having three of us is that if we do end up presenting any incorrect information, we've got another two to be able to spot us and correct it. So the goal of Pro Tools Answers is to provide solid and dependable information about Pro Tools, hoping to give our user community a deeper insight into what I think is an inherently complicated app in comparison, so they can deepen their understanding of it, and that also helps them gain confidence in it. But I think one of the other benefits is that it will give confidence to newer users who are wanting to dip their toe into the water with what I would hope to be reliable information, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Well said.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It was it was entirely scripted out for me.
Off the screen. Did you just read all of that off the screen, Dave?
No, I've got a script writer.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay. So, yeah, having given this a lot of thought, I think what we need to do is to be able to separate out the core functions of MIDI and the tools that modern DAWs give us to be able to separate those out in conversation. So we thought we'd dedicate an entire episode to exploring Pro Tools MIDI along with Logic expert, Pro Tools expert for music and post, and lecturer at the Royal College of Music in Stockholm. Thank you so much for joining us, Juhani.
No, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be part of this.
Thank you so much. So I think we're going to be taking a lead from you, actually, for a majority of this episode. Now, we've got a number of kind of talking points that you and Anders have been discussing over the last few days or so.
Yeah.
So we can go down those, and then I've got a couple of comments that we can refer to from some of the forum threads, and just see if we can liken some features to what you might use in Logic, and maybe discuss some of the features that people have a little bit of trouble with in Pro Tools, debunking some myths, etc., etc., etc.
Yes.
So,
could we just start off with
I have a list.
I have a question first, Juhani, because
you have a question. Yeah, perfect.
You're using Logic and Pro Tools, right?
Yes,
so
that's
when
correct.
you're moving from Logic to Pro Tools and you're doing some MIDI stuff, what do you miss when you're in Pro Tools?
What do I miss when I'm in Pro Tools? Well, it's a good question. I get that. My students ask me quite often. They ask me to compare the MIDI functionality or even the applications in themselves. And I have to say that there's nothing I can do in Pro Tools when it comes to MIDI that I mean, everything is in there in Pro Tools. But there are some things that are not in there. But those things I almost never use. They are quite sophisticated and sometimes complicated. But I would say for my day-to-day use of MIDI, everything I need is in Pro Tools. So
yeah. And I think if we can move beyond the most, I think, general sweeping kind of critique is that MIDI and Pro Tools is rubbish. I think that's objectively untrue. I mean, it may not be the best instrument for everybody for all styles. And I don't think there is such a thing. But it isn't rubbish, and I have a sense as to where that comes from. You guys are far too young. But back before Pro Tools 8, Pro Tools 8 redid the what was it? Actually, it was 7. Now that I think about it, Pro Tools 7 redid the GUI of Pro Tools. So it looked. If you take a look at 6 and earlier, it looked a lot different. And then one of the things that we changed while we were doing that redo for 7 is that's when we brought in things like instrument tracks. That's when we brought in things like the score editor window and the MIDI editor window and all that stuff. And there was so much with that release that we didn't really talk all that much about the MIDI stuff. We really didn't push it. And so the reputation of MIDI prior to version 7 has persisted. Prior to version 7 in Pro Tools, there were some definite gaps, but those gaps are a lot less from 8 on. But I don't think that message has filtered up through people's opinions.
And one thing that I find with Logic is that there are so many things you can do with MIDI, But it's also quite complicated to remember everything, because you can do many things in so many different ways. And one thing that I like about Pro Tools is that if you know how to handle the audio, you do basically the same thing with MIDI. Yeah. So the learning curve isn't as steep. And I struggle myself sometimes when I come back to Logic from Pro Tools to try to remember how, I know I can do this, but how do I do that? So I have to search, and which is embarrassing when I have students. I have to go up into the help menu and where is that function? And that to me is a bad thing with Logic, that it's sort of grown too big and losing track of philosophy in a way, which I find that in Pro Tools, Pro Tools sticks to its philosophy. If you know one thing, then you know it, and you can use it in many different ways. So when it comes to shortcuts and key commands, I absolutely love that you can't change the key commands in Pro Tools. And I know that you talked about this in a previous episode, and I have to agree, don't do that. Keep it that way. It's perfect, because it's second nature. In Logic, not so much, actually.
You're bringing up a couple of things that I think would naturally come up in the conversation, and one of them is the ethos of the DAW. You know, we were talking off camera before we started shooting that I think people expect Pro Tools to be the master of all trades. You know, especially as it is regarded as the industry standard. So why aren't Avid integrating every little feature that Ableton bring in, or you know, Reaper bring in? Logic, you know, why are they not integrating that with all of that stuff with every release? But Pro Tools at its core, I think, has always had a focus on the professional community, the install clients and partners that Avid have been working with for a very, very, very long time. The app, I think, is ingrained in the DNA of the industry, whereas a lot of the other apps that are coming in are predominantly consumer focused, I think, and they have a lot more room possibly to play, and you know, and maybe a little bit more license to kind of evolve things and try new things. And I have conversations a lot with my students at Point Blank, who focus entirely, for a majority of their course, on Ableton. And one of the things that comes across always is the differences in what those two, what Pro Tools and Ableton are for. You know, Pro Tools is essentially replacing tape machine and a desk with, you know, some wonderful editing stuff, obviously, whereas Ableton is focusing what I tend to refer to as musical Lego. There's lots of, you know, sort of dragging around and arranging loops, instruments, and those loops, and whether they're audio or MIDI, they're right there in front of the user to be able to click and drag straight onto the timeline, and there's very little to do there. So you know, the philosophy behind the two are very, very different.
Yeah.
Juhani, you had a list. You had some stuff prepared for us here.
Yes, there are some. Yeah, I have a list. When you asked me last week about this differences between Logic and Pro Tools, it really got me thinking. I actually couldn't go to sleep that night. I stayed up way too late thinking, yeah, and that's that little detail there. And so I have a list, and it's in no particular order. So I was thinking maybe I could show you something. There is one thing that I would like to start with, which is a thing that most people don't know about in Logic, but it's super useful. And I haven't been able to replicate it in Pro Tools. So, and it's a quite simple thing.
I'm sure Anders will have you there.
I think I know what Juhani is talking about there, and I don't really know. Andy might be the right guy.
I have no idea what he's talking about. I can't wait. Let's bring it on, baby.
Yeah, here we have a region. It's not called clips. It's a region with MIDI, which I recorded using step input recording, which we also can do that in Pro Tools, of course. And it sounds like this. Now, the thing is that this doesn't sound very human. We can humanize, of course, but that's something we can do in almost any DAW. And the thing is that if we look at the notes here in this recording, they're really quantized. So The thing that you can do in Logic is to humanize it in a special way. In order to be able to do this trick, I have to quantize this region, even though it is quantized, which is weird, but that's the way it works. So now it's quantized again. But this means that I have the ability to use Q flam. And if I zoom in now, can you see that the notes are actually playing the lowest note and then moving on up? So it sounds like this. Instead of no human can possibly play all the notes at the same time. And also I can do it the other way. I can turn down the flam value and we get this. And this makes a huge difference when you're using MIDI pianos and stuff. So, and this is region-based, which is a bit odd. If I wanted one of these chords to go the other opposite direction, then I have to cut it out and then do it separately, like so.
And this is doing it in real time, isn't it? It's essentially, it's a real-time property.
It does move the notes. Okay. So it's, well,
I suppose
I don't know.
I can see it. It is moving things, yeah.
Yeah. So you can humanize MIDI in Pro Tools, but this I cannot do, I think. What do you say?
No, I don't think I've seen this particular tool.
No, and I think this speaks to, I think one of my biggest things for workflow is you'll never find any DAW that does all the MIDI stuff. I mean, this is one of those things that is in Logic, but maybe not in other things. Now, here's where I change what most people do with workflows. A lot of folks, and I don't know, Juhani is, sorry, I mispronounced your name.
No.
Oh, I didn't? Oh my God. So I think what Juhani probably doesn't do, because he's a smart guy, is he probably doesn't do his MIDI and then render it to audio and then bring it into Pro Tools. Leave it MIDI. Okay, if there's something, if you can do that kind of a flam in another DAW, do it there and then bring the MIDI into Pro Tools rather than limiting yourself. Because I get a lot of folks that's like, okay, I did all my stems in Logic and I bounced them all to audio files. Great. You know what I can do with that? Not much, right? If I wanted to change the key or anything like that, that doesn't help me. But if you then just give me the MIDI files and you can export it as a standard MIDI file and you just import it in, you've given me the best of both worlds. You've given me very small data, the changes in the MIDI that Juhani was doing, and now I can take the benefit of what he's tweaked out and then I can assign my own sound. And for those of you who think that you can't use exactly the same instrument, you can. Because if you use Blue Cat Audio, you can open up AU or VST or any of those guys. I wouldn't, but you could.
Yeah. Do you know? Andy, I'm so glad you've gone there, because what we're moving Pro Tools on from now is being a DAW that people would pitch their tent in, right? And that's the only environment that you work in. But they're just tools. Right, so we'll use Pro Tools for that. We'll use Logic for a little bit of composition work. I recommend students who don't have access to Melodyne or any pitch correction.
Dude, in this room, I've got 4 basses and 2 tubas. I'm not going to limit myself to instruments. So I think that folks that basically stake their claim and start to defend turf unreasonably are missing the larger point. You
can take your workflows out into other apps and do certain things, then bring them back in.
But do it the right way, right? And a lot of folks are going to take audio from another DAW and bring it into Pro Tools, which is basically you've printed it and really removed a lot of the flexibility that you can do downstream. That's my soapbox, and I'm off of it now.
It's a good thing you mentioned this, Andy, because this is exactly the way I work. I do some of my arranging in MIDI in Logic, and then I transfer it to Pro Tools using these tools because I know that they are in there in Logic. But then for mixing and finishing the project, or in most projects I do everything in Pro Tools. But it's sometimes useful to use tricks. I also use Ableton quite a lot for creating music because it's so easy to use random stuff in Ableton. It's really inviting you to do randomized things, which surprise me, and it's great fun. So,
how are you liking Reason? By the way, I know you're a Logic guy. How are you liking MIDI functionality in Reason?
Well, it's been quite some time. I used to use Reason version 1 or so. It's been ages, but I think it's really, really good. And it's funny that they actually introduced audio recording, even though they promised for many years that they would never do that. So I think it's really useful. And I know that there are quite a few students that use Reason also.
And it's an AAX plugin now, so you could actually just launch it inside of Pro Tools natively, and man, that's a great workflow.
We were talking about this a few episodes ago. My mind was blown when I was first introduced to Reason. You know, sending the MIDI out of Reason, doing the audio, and then bringing it back on an aux.
Great,
but,
it's great.
But also, we're talking about Ableton here, and what can you do in Ableton right now in Pro Tools? Ableton Link, right?
Yeah,
Ableton Link. Yep.
Absolutely. Yep.
But Juhani, I have to say, tell you that flam thing that you got going there, that's pretty sweet.
It is.
It's pretty sweet, and especially it's very useful when the students present projects. Because I do a lot of listening to their ongoing things. And one of the things that makes a huge difference is when you start humanizing stuff like this. So it's easy from my standpoint as a teacher to show the students how it can sound more human. And this is one of the ways.
But you bring up an interesting point here. And what we're probably in the business of, since we're talking about MIDI stuff today, it's about making music, right? And then you come into the philosophy of making music. Are you supposed to quantize everything so that you can then humanize it, or is it better at some point maybe just play it the way it is and let it be groovy and swingy? And I think it's a philosophy thing going on here, and I think you're presenting it very well as well, because you're using it in a context with students where you're talking about musical values, where you say, so everything that you've quantized like this, make it like that instead. So the equivalent of that in Pro Tools, what I would come up with is to people tend to think that quantize is something that's forever. So let's look at this piano here. It looks pretty quantized. I think I should just maybe just edit my grid here. Just a second.
So what you're saying, Anders, is essentially quantizing is just for Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. No, so this little piano here is probably quantized. It looks like it, almost, at least. No, it's not quantized. But if I quantize it very quickly, so I'll quantize it just quarter notes right now, so you can see the difference. And people seem to think that this is the way now I've destructively quantized this. But in Pro Tools, there's a function that remembers the original recording forever. So even if I come back 2 years later, I can select a clip, go into the event menu, and I can, in the event operation, I can restore the original performance, the way that I played it. And that would be like the
and
Pro
you can
Tools
even choose
version.
and you could choose what aspects you want to restore. So if you didn't like the quantize, but you did a lot of work with velocity that you want to keep, you can do that.
So that would be my go-to if I was having students and I was talking about the to make stuff more human and stuff like that. I would probably show this to my students.
This is really interesting that you brought this up, because it's actually one of those fascinating things with Pro Tools is that you can, in most cases, you can do the same thing, but you can do more. A good example is, let's say you want to quantize and transpose and change the length of MIDI notes. You can do that by using real-time properties, and you can turn them on and off on the fly. You cannot do that in Logic. It's going to take a few seconds before you hear the end result. And then, you know, what happens? You forgot what you were supposed to listen to. So I find that, okay, it might be a little bit limited. It looks like it's limited in Pro Tools, but it's actually more powerful. So I love showing my students how you do it in Logic and then how you can do it in Pro Tools and more. There's almost always, and you can do it in Pro Tools and you can do this also, which I find is very interesting.
Juhani, we have to agree on something. Don't mention MIDI real-time properties. That's one of my secret weapons.
Oh, really? You have to edit it out.
Juhani, I need to mention that the one more thing is exactly why our episodes are nearly an hour long.
Okay.
Let's move on to the next feature, Juhani.
Yeah, the next feature. Okay. So, I have to show you this one. It's really interesting because we have audio effects, of course, but we also have MIDI effects.
Yeah, these are great.
These are really, really interesting. For instance, the arpeggiator. I know that there are arpeggiators in Pro Tools, of course, but this one is really nice because you can do all sorts of stuff. At the beginning, when this came, I thought it was a toy, but then I realized it's actually a compositional tool. So if I play a chord here, you can hear that chord because I pressed the latch button. I can do stuff like this.
Yeah.
And do all kinds of... And also have some swing to that.
I use this for programming some stuff in MainStage for live arpeggiators in MainStage.
And see what I'm doing now? I'm dragging that MIDI region over to... So this one is now the result of the MIDI that was going on, and then I have to turn that off, and I have it. So
I have to be honest, Juhani, that's a very cool feature.
Yeah.
It is really, really nice. I know that you can do similar stuff, I think, in Falcon, which I find to be a fantastic synth.
You can, but exporting the MIDI, I don't think is something you can do in Falcon, unless I'm mistaken. Can you do that? Can you export that MIDI in Falcon?
I'm sorry, I don't know Falcon that well, so I can't.
Oh,
answer.
Falcon's great. Falcon's
It's great, but I don't know that feature.
I can see this almost being reverse engineered by bouncing down the part and then dragging it onto a MIDI track and converting the audio to the MIDI.
You could probably record it via an IAC bus also, perhaps.
Yeah. No, you definitely could. You could work around it, but it's nowhere near as intuitive as this. I remember I was doing a space show for American Museum of Natural History a couple of years ago, and I needed a random series of notes, and I went right to Logic, used the randomize because it's one of the effects that you've got in there, spit out a MIDI clip, and then just like the Flam thing, I mean, I got it out of Logic, brought it into Pro Tools, job done, and moved on with it.
Yeah, I could show you one more interesting MIDI effect. You can have up to 8. There are 9 MIDI plugins, but you can have 8. I've never used more than 2, I have to say. But we have the scripter, which I find to be really interesting because this allows you to write your own plugins if you want to. So. But there are obviously a lot of presets.
Go on, Juhani, make a script.
Actually, there are some. Let's see now. We have. This is an interesting feature, by the way. This happens quite often in Logic. In order to be able to get the library for this scripter plugin, I have to click somewhere where I don't know that I should click. See what happens when I put the pointer there? Then it magically appears. This is not easy to understand for new students. So you have to click somewhere where you don't think you can click. So here you have tutorial scripts. So if I wanted to write a plugin that has a fader with my name, I could do that quite easily. But let me show you. Harpeggiator is one of my favorites. Harpeggiator sounds like this.
Pretty.
So someone has written a script making this electric piano sound like a harp. And there's a community, of course, you can find all kinds of scripts online. So that's cool stuff. But do I use the arpeggiator often? No, I use it to demonstrate the scripter. For my own music, no harps.
Well, and there's a lot of stuff. There's some of that stuff that's already in MIDI real-time properties. Like you mentioned, duration, quantize. There was a couple other things, dynamics, and so on and so forth. That's in MIDI real-time properties already, and it's non-destructive, or it can be destructive if you want it to be. I think that's. I think it's a great feature. I think that's one of the things that will take me out of Pro Tools and put me into Logic before I go back into Pro Tools. It's a great feature.
Talking about teaching, there are some other features that I find to be extremely useful. Her mode tuning. Have you heard about her mode tuning?
Is that where you can tune every note separately?
Not well, sort of.
So you can make non-tempered tunings and stuff
exactly,
like that?
Yes. So let's see now. Where do we have it? I have here we have her mode tuning example. So I will hide all these tracks. Oh, sorry, I have to hide that one as well. So this is a cadenza. Sounds like a MIDI piano. So this is a project setting where we have the ability to, under the tab tuning, choose software instrument pitch. This is also something we can do in Pro Tools, of course. We have the equal tempered, we have the fixed. In the user, if I wanted to have the fifth too high, I can do that. But here we have the her mode tuning. And this is also something that's relatively new in Pro Tools, is that when you play a chord in Pro Tools, it knows the chord, you know. Same thing in Logic. If I play the C major, it will know it's a C major. But the her mode tuning will actually tune that chord. So it doesn't, what do you call it, float or vibrate. So it's a non-tempered, not equal tempered, I should say. And let's see now if I go back to the equal tempered. Hopefully you can hear the difference. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm not quite sure if I hear the difference, and then I bounce this to audio and do the null test and prove to my students they are actually different. But the thing is that it's interesting because almost every time I show this to students, when I return to the equal tempered, they go, "It sounds really weird now." And I say, yes, it sounds exactly as it has sounded all your lives. So it's an interesting thing to be able to demonstrate, and I'm happy this is in Logic and not in Pro Tools, I think.
Am I right in thinking that it's very similar to quantizing the pitch drift in Melodyne to 100%?
Not exactly, because in the chord C major, the third should be, 3 cents higher if it's driving towards the F. And if it's a G7, the seventh should be lower because it's driving down. So it's actually tuning the notes in the chords as you play the MIDI.
Interesting.
That's the classical. Like a violinist, they usually play an F sharp and a G flat, slightly different because they're not the same.
And that's why barbershop sounds the way it does. It's so clean. So that's one feature that is nice to have, but do I often use it? Not really. It's good to be able to demonstrate. But,
it's a niche workflow tool.
Yeah. So I wonder if I should check my list to see if there's something that I actually do use.
The next I have on my list was the drummer.
Oh, absolutely, the drummer. Now that is something.
You've got a nice workflow for drums, right?
Do I have a nice workflow?
No, Andy. Andy, I think you have a.
I did. Let me see if I can. Yeah, I can. While you're talking about this, I'll.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt Juhani. Go ahead. Juhani, go ahead.
Shall I go ahead with the drummer?
Yep. Oh, please.
Yep,
Do it.
okay.
Do it.
Yeah. So the drummer is a really, really nice thing because it's super useful and easy to use. I create a new track, and like in Pro Tools, we have different types of tracks. The one we don't have in Pro Tools is the drummer track, which is a hybrid type of track. It took me a while before I figured out what this means. The yellow region here. The lower half is the kick and snare, and the upper half is everything else. So if I deselect the kick, I don't have a kick in this region, and now I have no snare, and now I have nothing. So, and I can choose to have toms playing, and we could actually listen to this. It's probably going to be loud. And we have the ability to make it softer, more complex, and all kinds of... there are so many things in here, and we have the details for feel, pull, push, ghost notes and stuff. And also in the library we have loads of different drummers, different drum kits, and a really nice feature is that this is in its most basic form, this is a stereo track, but I can choose to have a producer kit using the same drum kit, and that would be SoCal Plus. And this opens up a lot of possibilities because we have the separated tracks now. And this is quite interesting. It's almost like industrial espionage, because you can go in here and have a look at how exactly did they compress the kick drum. And this is apparently done by pros. I've found all kinds of interesting stuff here in the mixer that implies that professionals were involved. Where they actually delayed one of the overheads with 15 samples to compensate for microphone placement. So this is really interesting and useful from an educational standpoint to see how did they mix it.
I do that fairly often with Tune Track Superior.
Yes. Yeah. And you can also use third-party drum plugins for this. And one feature that most people overlook is that if I click at the drum kit designer, here I have the kick drum, but now that I've chosen the producer kit, all the kick drums in the library is available. So I have loads and loads of drums and toms and cymbals and hats. So you get a lot of bang for the buck, so to speak.
This is where a lot of value is in Logic, and Apple give a phenomenal amount of stuff, for the $200 buy-in. I mean, it's a loss. It must be a loss leader for them, because it's just so much stuff they give away in the instruments. The instruments specifically are quite unique.
But then again, I love to show my students Boom, which I find to be underrated by most people. I think it's an immensely useful tool because it contains so much stuff, and these Easter eggs, about really open up a lot of possibilities. So I personally prefer to use Boom for basic drums to play along to.
I love Boom as well. It's on so many jingles that I've written.
I think it sounds great as well. I mean,
it's excellent. It's my secret weapon, one of my secret weapons. And I think when you brought that up now and you showed this, Juhani, I instantly thought of the workflow that I'm doing in using a third-party plugin Studio Drummer from Native Instruments, and I'm using the auxiliary output stems to do that in Pro Tools, basically to get everything separated. But that's like I have to press a few keys to be there. So what would I do to make it as streamlined? I'd probably save it as a track preset to be able to call on it as fast. But there is no way to do that as fast like with stock stuff in Pro Tools. You're totally right. Yeah,
Easy Drummer gives a nice loop library as well over a number of different genres.
Yeah, it's Studio Drummer as well. Yeah, it's great. Andy, do you have
yes.
You have a great little drummer workflow, right?
So Well, I don't know how great it is. It works for me. I did this demo on one of the live online learning seminars. I think that's one you're referring to, Andres.
Yeah.
Yeah. So by the way, for anybody who hasn't checked it out, Avid has this live online learning, which is these half-hour seminars on a number of different topics, and they've been tremendously well received. And there's a bunch of them on there. I did show this. I'll show my screen here.
And if you haven't seen them, there is a link down below. Use that. While you're there, clicking around, click on the like button as well.
You're always very confident in my editing ability and YouTube knowledge.
No, I'm recording. Okay, great. So you guys are seeing Pro Tools, yes?
Yes.
Great, fantastic. So what I've got here is Play, which is the East-West library. Things are going to be a little bit slow because of all the stuff I've got running. But come on. This is a drum kit that I really actually quite like. And this is the, there we go. Let's see here. This is the East-West. There's a number of Pro Drummers kits, and I think they're underrated. But there's some really, really nice kits in here. I want to be able to build a boom style TR-707, TR-808 matrix mixer, which is what that thing comes from. And the way that I've done it is I've got Play over here with a compressor afterwards for whatever reason. And I've got a number of different individual drum tracks. And what makes this kind of work, so you can see here that it looks kind of like a matrix editor with a number of different tracks with one note height per track. And the way that you do it is, and this is only on MIDI tracks, is that there's a number of different track heights. If you right click over here, you'll see a whole bunch of different ones. So for example, there's a medium track height, but with any MIDI track or instrument track, you also have a single note height over here. And it will even kind of tell you the possible combinations. So I know that there's only an E flat on this, and I go boom here, and there's my E flat. All of the outputs here, if I jump over to the edit window, all of these outputs are going to the same individual instrument, right? And here's one thing that is a little bit of a pain, is that if I change the MIDI fader on any one of these, it changes all of them, because you're changing the volume of the whole instrument. So changing this is changing the whole volume of the instrument. Changing this is changing the whole volume of the instrument, and so on and so forth. So what I'll do is I'll go to let's see here.
And that's because it's sending CC data to the instrument, isn't it? It's not a
it's sending a single MIDI volume, which is a little bit of a pain. So what I do instead is I go over to, let's see if I can't find it. There I go. So what I do here is I instead have all of my instruments going to the drum. So same thing that you have before. So it goes to just basically an aux track that holds this, and then I have the individual outputs of that instrument going to aux tracks. And this is where I would then go ahead and mix, and I would do my changes over here. And you can put sends on there, inserts, and the whole 9 yards. You can mix like a real man on this stuff instead of mixing inside of a plugin window. And again, it's, can you do it in Logic? Yeah, you can do it in Pro Tools. It's a little bit less, I think, obvious, but it's just as easy. And the great thing about this is, like you said, Anders says you can save as a track preset. You can also put these inside folders, so you can split out that folder. You can see everything you could possibly need, and you could change views, and all the shortcuts still work, and does this whole thing. Really, once you've done a very little bit of setup, this is not a disruptive workflow in the least, right? You just drop it in, and then you basically, when you don't need it, you just fold it right up, and there, Bob's your uncle, and you move on to other things.
And do it once, and then save it as a template, or import it back in session data.
Do it once,
exactly right.
Make a track preset, and then you can always recall it.
Yeah.
It's great.
Absolutely. And I think one of the great things I like about that is you can use any drum sounds you want. There's no limit, because you're actually building it. Like you're not using a feature that somebody put into their product. You're basically building that architecture from scratch, and you can put whatever product you want to inside there, followed by whatever effects and all that stuff. And this is, I think, something that people will look a little bit differently on. MIDI notes inside of Pro Tools, as well as plugins, are sample rate timestamped. That isn't true with things like VSTs and AUs. They are not they're not sample accurate. They don't report their latency to the DAW. AAX plugins do. So I'll actually get a different timed result when I do this in Pro Tools versus when I do it in other DAWs because of that accuracy. And it's more accurate. It's more visibly true.
That's really interesting, because one of the critiques that I see often is that there are latency problems with MIDI in Pro Tools. And I can't get my head around that, because as I said before, I've been working in MIDI pretty much every session for God knows how many years. And I even bounce down often with MIDI on the timeline. I've never had latency issues.
Maybe they're talking about what they're hearing back in their headphones.
You can create it. Yeah, you can create problems with sort of powerful plugins and certain routings, but the core of the engine is rock solid.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Interesting thing that happens when I check out things in different DAWs, like the drummer in Logic, is that I start thinking, how could I pull this off in Pro Tools? And I done it more or less exactly as you described it, Andy, because I find it to be the overview you get, and it's really like Anders said, you do that preparation once and save it as a track preset, and you can also even use any name you like. So I constantly save my own presets, and I find them like that. Yeah. And you cannot find presets that fast in Logic, especially plugins. I love the fact that you can write inflator and then you get it straight away in Pro Tools. There are third-party solutions in Logic where you can do the same thing, but I absolutely love the workflow for finding stuff in Pro Tools. So. But when we're talking about the drummer, can I show you one? Anders asked me about MIDI controlling different types of sounds.
Yes, is this articulation ID?
Exactly. This is really interesting.
So that's one thing that I've been asked during classes from people that write like scores or scoring for films. And this is a particular thing that seems to be really, really useful in Logic.
Yes. So I have here a drummer track containing only a hi-hat. So it sounds like you can hear that hi-hat, I hope. But if I open up the event window, we see that, okay, what do we have here? Actually, there's a kick and a snare as well, but they're muted. But all these F sharps, those are hi-hats. How come they sound different? It's because they're controlling different samples. So I can choose to show the articulation ID, and then we can see that there are actually 7 or so, 8 different hi-hats. And this is the first place, to my knowledge, where articulation ID showed up the first time. It's in the drummer. But it's also available for studio horns and studio strings, where you can have different articulations for different chords. Sustain, staccato, and stuff like that. Yeah. But it's intriguing that you can clearly hear that there are different hi-hats, but it's the same note. So,
yeah, this is actually fairly common in a lot of virtual instruments. So, like, I do a lot of scoring, and I'm in East West all the time. I live there. I think mostly because I've done my hours in East West, and I don't want all that study to go to waste. But you basically can set it to, obviously you can set any virtual instrument worth its name. You can set the articulation you want with basically controlling notes that are outside the playing range. But you can also just turn on this kind of feature that basically round robins different articulations. Okay. So it basically just cycles through, or you can have it cycle through or randomize different articulations just to humanize, if to overuse the term. So it's not it's not only a Logic feature. It's very common in a lot of virtual instruments.
Yeah, Andy, I used to use East West for I think it was Silver Strings when they released back in the day, and I loved it. But I checked out when they insisted that I pay for play. When I think a Pro Tools version upgraded, and I checked out at that point. I was devastated.
I can't get over the strings. It's just I use it all the time for scoring work.
I think Native Instruments own them now, don't they? Because I'm pretty sure I've got the license in my Native Instruments account, but I can't use it. It's upsetting. But the articulations thing, I use that in Superior. Do you have sort of 3 or 4 different ways of hitting a particular drum? Yeah. Similar, it's just mapped over different keys. But it's not automatic.
No. So shall we have a look at the list again?
Yes, smart controls is the next one on my list.
Smart controls, yeah. Talking about list, we have a list in Logic. That could be nice too. Smart controls, absolutely. That's one feature that I absolutely love because it's super handy. So I could go back to this first MIDI thing.
Piano.
Yeah. So I press B as in, I don't know, B, A, B. So what this does is that it controls the most important parameters on this channel strip. So now I have a script here. I should probably remove that. For instance, if I turn this knob labeled model, I can remotely control the model of this electric piano. And all software instruments have smart controls, and they're quite cleverly laid out. I can show you what happens if I create a drummer track and I press the B. Here we have you can see the mix obviously, and compression and effects. And what it does, if I open up the compressor plugin, by the way, this is pretty good, this compressor. You see what happens when I turn the compression knob? It's actually changing several parameters at the same time. And this is something you can design yourself. If you have third-party plugins, you have Omnisphere, for instance. You can choose whatever parameters you want to remotely control by using smart controls. And it's also available as an own window. And this window you can also have on your iPad. So if you're performing live, you can do stuff on the iPad. So that's a nice feature, I think. Macros and smart controls.
Yeah.
There are similar stuff in Pro Tools, I would say, but not quite.
I'm not sure I'd go. I would probably keep my mixing in Pro Tools, because that starts to blur the line, I think, between it's cool. It's nice. It certainly is an easy way to work. I would argue too easy. I don't want a single knob changing 2 parameters. I'm more tweaky, as Anders and Dave will both attest to. But I guess I'd rather do that in Pro Tools rather than do a whole lot of mixing in Logic, because in MIDI, I doff my cap to Logic in some things, but as far as mixing goes, I've never felt a real desire to jump out of Pro Tools and mix in Logic.
I have to agree totally. During this Corona year, I've been producing quite a lot of music. The first song I wrote, I mixed in Logic. And then I decided, no, not again. Because mixing to me is so much easier and so much more fun in Pro Tools. Because it's better, I think, for mixing, absolutely. I would dare to say that I almost cannot mix in Logic anymore, because there are so many features in Pro Tools that are superior. Automation, for instance. So, but for MIDI, some things are nice to have.
This is the last feature you showed us now. I'm just thinking, I heard what you said and I tried to understand.
Yeah.
But that we could automate any instrument plugin in Pro Tools. How does this differ from that? And is it a deal breaker for you? Is this something that you miss when you go into Pro Tools?
No, I don't miss it at all. This is also one of the things that it's nice that it's in there in Logic and you can do all kinds of stuff with it. But do I use it? No. Do I need it? Not really.
What's the appeal
It's like
of it?
Andy
Is
said,
it-
I prefer to do it myself in Pro Tools.
But I'm struggling to understand the appeal of this. Is it that it's one button always opening the most important features? Or what's...
Well, you could do sound design experiments. If you have a piano patch and when you turn a knob, you want to add reverb. And as you turn up the reverb, you want it to be slightly distorted. And past a certain point, you want to add a delay. So you can think of ways to control several things using one knob. And it's fun for a while. And but I personally don't have the time to do that type of stuff. But I can imagine that some kids like to play around with it. So
I think it would end up being simpler just doing each of those things separately on a separate automation lane.
Yeah. It can be handy to hit the B button to see what shows up. It might be a handy parameter that a filter cutoff or something.
Am I understanding this correctly? It's basically a bridge between having a virtual instrument and then adding some effects on that, like compressors and distortion and maybe a reverb, that basically is just a plugin that lives inside of that instance of the instrument. Is that the correct way to...
Well, no. Well, actually, everything that you put on your channel strip, if it's a equalizer or a reverb or a delay, those plugins can show up in the smart controls. And if they don't, you can easily assign one knob to fade reverb send, for instance. So anything that's on one channel strip can be remotely controlled by the smart controls, which is a limitation because in Ableton you can control anything from anything almost. So if you have an LFO running on one track, it can control something on a different track. So it's slightly limited, but I don't know, it's not a deal breaker in any way, but it's an interesting feature.
Okay,
cool.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to transform window?
Absolutely. Yes. The transform window is really useful sometimes for problem solving. Let's see now. Here we have loads of stuff going on. By the way, here's a feature that Logic has borrowed from Pro Tools, namely track alternatives. So this is playlists, more or less. So I have a different playlist, so to speak, on this track. And here I have I could do this from scratch. I can bring out the step input keyboard. And this is the only way to record MIDI directly into a MIDI region in the main window. So the MIDI I created here, I would like to transform. Here we have this MIDI. I can imagine that there are some notes here that are for, let's say, E flat. So I can tell Logic to MIDI transform. I can choose any type of window and then go here and say create a new transform set. Create, like so. And this is all a question of logic. So what do I want to do? Yes, I want to find all positions. The status should be a note. And the note should be equal to, let's say, I'll probably pick a note that's not in here. So, so now I've told Logic to, find that note. Select only. Look, it found one. It got one, yeah. And what do I want to do with that? I want to add one step. Select and operate, or operate only. Since it's selected, I can choose operate only. So it transposed that note. So this is a really basic example, but imagine that you've written a symphony. I imagine you do that all the time, and then you realize that, oh no, violin 4 in this octave, this particular note triggers the wrong sample.
Yeah.
So you can have Logic search the entire symphony for that particular wrong note and change it to a different sample. So this is the one way of using, well, actually, obviously you have a lot of presets here. We have the humanize, which I think Andy talked about, and you mentioned random pitch, I think.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
yeah. So this is a really powerful window, not the best looking perhaps, but it does what it says on the box, so to speak. So that's one feature that I also like in Logic. But do I use this often? No, not really. I mean, it's
There's something kind of like it in Pro Tools. Let me share my screen real quick. So there's this little guy,
Yes.
which is basically a vertical version of your horizontal window.
And it's still not as pretty either.
It's not as pretty.
Well, it looks better
not pretty.
in dark mode.
It looks
Yeah,
better
it
in
does.
dark mode. So, same kind of thing. And for anybody who hasn't used, for any MIDI person who hasn't used this recently because it didn't do exactly what you wanted it to do, use it, because it does work the way it should these days. Back, again, I'm talking about, 8 and 7 and some of the older versions, it was a little bit iffy, but now it does exactly what you want it to do. And even more than what Juhani was doing is you can set the note range and in the octave you can set a range, but you can also have it intelligently find the tops or bottoms of any multiple chord, and then you can also filter it by duration. You can filter it by its position. And the other thing you could so for Juhani is he wants to find this symphony and just select the notes and do something. You select it and hit the up arrow once, and then you've just changed the pitch, right?
Yeah.
Or if you want to, and this is something I do all the time, is you can split out notes and you can either cut or copy them, and that's where your doubling comes in. So, for example, I could take, the top note of every chord, select the top note of every chord, and add it to a synth or a flute or whatever I wanted to do. I could take the bottom note of every chord and then copy that and put it on a bass track. So this does something. In some senses, it doesn't do as much as what Logic's window does. In some senses, it does more.
In a way, it's funny because what I use the transform window for in Logic is more or less what I showed you and what you showed me. And I was so happy to find that the same functionality was in there in Pro Tools. So again, it's something that I don't miss at all because I can do that in Pro Tools. It's not obvious that it's in there, but it's in there, and it's super efficient.
Can I just do a quickie that's similar? It's not the same thing, but
I'm hoping you're going to do what I'm thinking of as well.
So this is just an easy thing, and most people probably know about this. But if you're programming drums, these are not drums, obviously. But then you'll find out that your hi-hat is constantly too loud. And you could, of course, try to find that note and try to select all of the notes for an entire song. But the quicker way is just to click on that note.
Exactly where I was going to go.
And that will select the entire road. And if you just want to lower the volume of that, just do that. And that happens for all of them individually. Yeah. And
by the way, so you can also use the arrow keys to nudge up and down the velocities as well.
Yeah, command and up down arrow would do the exact same thing as Andy is saying here.
And we can see all of the automation lanes at the bottom. You can just keep on folding out automation lanes at the bottom of the MIDI editor window.
Great feature.
Yeah.
Fab.
Juhani, let me ask you a question, and I haven't touched Logic recently enough to know the answer to this question. But where is Logic with relationship to MPE?
Well, good question. I think it can play it back, but I don't think you can program it inside. I'm not sure. Where I discovered MPE is in Bitwig Studio, which I think was the first DAW that used it, and it's super handy, especially for folk musicians. They go bananas when I show them that, because you can pitch bend one note in a chord, and you can do all kinds of interesting microtonality stuff. And as the way I understand it, I haven't checked it out that well in Logic, but it will play it back, I think.
But you can't write it.
I'm not 100% sure. I think it's the same thing with Pro Tools. It does understand it, I think.
Well, if you go to a live online learning seminar, I do talk about that as well. So MPE, for those who don't know the acronym, stands for multi-polyphony expression. And basically it is a way of working with MIDI, and it's in some senses it's just a trick that they do with the existing spec, but it really is kind of a transformative thing, where you can have different parameters on different notes. Now you need to have the right kind of keyboard to be able to play it. So I've got over here, because I'm that guy, I've got a Rolly and I've got a Sensel over here. So I've got two MPE keyboards. Actually, I don't have any keyboards in my office that aren't MPE. That's how much of a geek I am. But for strings and for anything that's going to be outside of the normal tonality, this is where it goes. And here's how I set it up. So what I have, so Falcon, you're saying Pro Tools now, right?
Yeah.
Right. So Falcon, all of a sudden now in the Falcon 2.0 now has a bank of MPE presets, which are designed to be able to accept multi-polyphony expression natively. I also have East-West. East-West does the same thing. Obviously, the Equator, which is the one that comes with Rolly, does the same thing. So there's a growing list of instruments that accept MPE. The way that I've got this worked out is that if you take a look over here, I've got again, it's a folder. I don't know how I lived without them for so long. I've got a folder, and each one of these 16 MIDI tracks has an individual MIDI channel input from my Rolly. Okay. And it also has an individual MIDI channel output to the Falcon. So this is taking input on channel 1 from the Rolly, outputting it to MIDI channel 1 on the Falcon. It takes a little bit of time to set up, but only once, right? And I even, let's see if I can find that
that's
location.
just cascading, right? So it's basically just one shortcut to cascade the...
Yeah, except for MIDI doesn't cascade quite right,
All right.
unfortunately. Thanks, Anders. That's awesome.
Cut that out.
Yeah.
I know you won't, Dave. You never do.
No, don't, because so Cascade doesn't work exactly the way you want it to do with MIDI, but it's a little bit maddening, but at the same time, it's not the end of the world here. And so here's what I've got. So I've got a whole bunch of, I'll just show the tracks. So each one of these is just a single pitch at a time, right? And so if I play this. So that's, and again, it's an easy thing to set up. And one of the cool things you can do with that is this little guy and this is something you can't do with most instruments. So if I'm going to go here, I'm going to change all these guys to show bend. And here you can see I've got two different pitch bend playlists over here. And this is what this looks like.
Oh, I love synths.
That's
beautiful.
I love PE. It is the most exciting thing that to happen to MIDI in a long time. But and Juhani, you mentioned this, is Bitwig has probably been the leader in building MPE into their engine. And I think Pro Tools might be the last one because there's a lot of other things that we're working on. But until that happens, if you want to set up MPE, it's a super easy way to do it. In fact, Dave, maybe we can take this as a track preset and throw this into the YouTube link or something like that. So just so that my pain can be your gain, because it does take a little bit of time to set up. But once you do, it's done. And again, you're working inside of the same DAW where your live drummer's playing, where your live guitar player's strumming, and you don't have to jump from one platform to another, which is a big deal to me.
And once more, of course, once you've set it up, you just save it as a track preset. And track presets, of course, can contain multiple tracks. It's just not one track. If you select all of them, make a track preset, and that will recall one track preset will recall all of that. Yeah. Great stuff, Andy. Love that.
Now that you mention Equator, I think I was using Equator in Logic when I tried it out, and I got it to work, but I couldn't quite. It didn't sound that good as your music example did, but I got it to work at least.
The check's in the mail.
You can download the template for Pro Tools then.
Yeah. Shall we move on to Step Editor?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of my favorites, which I actually do use quite often because when it comes to drumming, I think it's really, really useful. I can show you quickly how. And this is also a slightly hidden feature. I think I will create a new drummer, standard drummer, playing in this case, his typical drumming. So here I have it. I think I'll hide those tracks to avoid confusion. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a hybrid type of region where we have the kick and snare at the bottom, and then we have the rest of the stuff up here. The interesting thing is that if I go to the window here and choose the event, hang on, well actually I do need to, I think I will convert this to a MIDI region. So, and since I'm using a laptop, I prefer to use the big windows as often as possible. Step Editor. They have a step sequencer these days, but let's stick to this one. So it's in the wrong order now, which is a bit annoying. This is the kick, and I think I need to turn down the volume here slightly. So let's listen to this drummer. And this is similar to what Andy was showing with the MIDI tracks in Pro Tools. But the thing is here, and I will go ahead and change the tools here because I probably want to use the pen and the eraser tool, because now I can do all kinds of cool stuff, like so. This is always very popular when I show this to students. Because it doesn't stop here, because if I have the snare drum here, and I can go in and choose a different type of I don't know, what do you call this? 7 tuplets? Yeah, 7 tuplets. You probably, I was on the wrong, well actually I can. Now this would take forever to program in the normal piano roll, like so, because the step editor is really useful. And the thing is that people are not aware it's in there. And this is really funny, because in most cases people press the P, and now they changed it around because they have the step sequencer. But up until the latest, fairly new version of Logic, it was right here. It was a step editor. No one ever clicked it. And it was a fantastic tool for programming drums. And people still said, it's so difficult to program drums. Yes, but have you clicked the step editor? It's really, really, it's right there in front of you. It's not quite in front of us anymore because they've added some new functionality, which they have borrowed quite heavily from Ableton, the possibility to play live loops. But the thing is that this is not only for drums, because I could record a bass line containing a scale and use that as a basis for step editing MIDI, using all kinds of interesting rhythms and stuff like that. So I've forgotten what the question was, but the step editor is a very powerful tool indeed. But it can be simulated quite easily in Pro Tools, I would say.
I'll be honest. The one thing that trumps everything else is the ability to work side by side with live audio. Period. Right. So if I had in my younger days decided that Logic's mix environment was where I wanted to live, I'd be a Logic user. There's no because you could do everything you want to do there. But and again, I don't. Maybe it's an outrageous thing for me to say, and certainly in the comments, some people may honestly disagree. But I've had a lot of experience with a lot of DAWs, and as far as recording and mixing and editing workflows go, it makes a lot of sense to me, and it's transportable, and it's I've never looked back on it as being a bad idea. And if that's where I'm going to do everything else, I'll do my MIDI there until the time when I need a random assortment of things, and then I'll jump out into Logic, get it done, and then drag the MIDI back in. And a lot of the things that Juhani was mentioning are great, but they're mostly MIDI things, which makes them very transportable into Pro Tools. And just don't be that guy that bounces everything to audio tracks and then gives it to the other people you're working with, because you basically tied their hands behind their back.
Yeah, it's interesting because now we talked mainly about MIDI stuff, but there are some deal breakers when it comes to audio and mixing that really the reason why I prefer to work in Pro Tools is the automation, the clip gain. I can't live without it.
Yeah.
You can almost do it in Logic, but it's so cumbersome and strange. And another thing which might seem as a small detail is move event to playhead. Control click.
Yeah.
Or the end or the anchor.
Yeah.
Which can be done in Logic, but no one uses it because it's too complicated. So there are certain things that.
And those are the features that you use like 1,000 times a day.
1,000 times a day.
Not once every 3 weeks, but.
Yes,
literally,
like the 7 tuplets. It happens.
No, I use
once
those
every 6 months.
Yeah. Andy, you go to sleep listening to that stuff.
all of Andy's Grammys,
which is why I don't have any hair.
All of Andy's Grammys have 7 tuplets in.
Tuplets. It's the way of the future. Mono mixes.
This has been really, really interesting, and thanks for this expert view in the similarities and also differences in Logic in comparison to Pro Tools.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But to sum it up, I tell my students when they ask me, can I do what I do in Logic? Can I do that in Pro Tools? I say, yes, absolutely. And you can do it probably a lot faster, and you get it right. You can work in Logic, but I've been using Logic for 20 years. I regret I should have switched 10 years ago. But it's been like maybe 4 or 5 years now, and I find that my workflow is so much more efficient. I get more music done in Pro Tools. I enjoy working in Logic; it's great fun, and Ableton and Bitwig and all this. But if I were to choose one DAW to bring to that famous island, it would probably be Pro Tools.
And a generator.
Yes, absolutely.
This is how things move on. This is how competition is good for everybody, isn't it? Because you see what everybody else is doing and go, well, I quite fancy a little bit of that. I fancy a little bit of that. This is what my user community is talking about. This is what my professional community is talking about. Let's see what we can get in there. And Andy, as you were saying a few episodes ago, hope it doesn't make it too expensive.
Yeah. And that's, I think that's, and I don't know if this goes in the show, but maybe one of the things that people can have a real honest complaint about is the number of free instruments included with Pro Tools. And part of the reason is that we don't want to charge. We have to pass on certain costs to the customer, because it adds cost to what we have to pay in terms of licensing in Pro Tools. Well, if you look at our audience, it's at least half post-production, and if we add more virtual instruments, knowing that they're not going to use that, and charge people for it anyways, it's not being exactly fair. And I'll be honest, you can, if you like Logic's instrument, and I do, spend $100, get Blue Cat's Patchwork, and then you can use theirs, and Bob's your uncle. So I guess it's different corporate approaches, right? You got the Apple approach, you've got the Bitwig, you've got Avids, you've got others, you've got Nuendo and Cubase. Those are different ones as well, and they all have their different takes on what the user base really needs, what they want, what they don't need, and then they prioritize that list.
And Andy, you're bringing up a very good point. There would be absolutely no point in having two companies making the same DAW that knows the same stuff and does it in the same way, because then there would be no market for such a DAW, right?
Yeah.
So
and probably both of those DAWs would fail.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
So,
they'd split the difference. Yeah.
So you have to make a decision. That's the way we do things. They do it that way, and those are the difference. If you like that way of working in Bitwig, use it.
Yeah. So you can pitch your tent in one DAW and go, this is the one that I want to do the majority of my production work in. But then everything else that's around it just becomes a tool. So I'm going to go to Logic, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to Ableton to do that. I'm going to go to Reason to do that. And then you bring it all in, stir the pot, render it out, and you've got a Grammy.
Yeah.
I also think that a lot of the times when these discussions come up, why is Pro Tools the studio standard and stuff like that, people tend to think of the answer by coming to their own needs first, and then it probably makes no sense for some people that Pro Tools is the studio standard, but they don't think about that in a dubbing stage in Hollywood. They have 7 or 8 or 10 or 11 Pro Tools machines that are all running as one unit with basically thousands and thousands of track playing back at the same time in synchronization within one frame, and you can't do that in any other DAW because Pro Tools is a software and hardware solution. But if you're sitting at home and recording one guitar and singing into a microphone, I get it. There is no real reason for seeing Pro Tools as a studio standard, but that's based on your own situation. But Pro Tools, you could integrate that with a 24-track tape, or why not 2 tape machines, and have Pro Tools playback and actually even controlling that tape machine and responding to wobble and flutter and the differences in motor speeds on those 2 machines and stuff like that.
The moniker industry standard, I think, is oft misunderstood.
Yeah,
it kind of sets itself up on a very high pedestal, but there's a reason for that. But your perception is all going to be based on your experience and what you've seen, what you personally have experienced during your time doing any kind of work or.
Well, but I go one step further. By the way, when Avid calls themselves the industry standard, it always kind of bugs me, because people think that we're calling ourselves the industry standard. We're not. We're actually kind of saying thank you to the industry for making us the standard. And I think it comes down to, I think what Anders said is worth its weight in gold. Is if you're just, if you're working from home, like I think the question from the Facebook page was, I'm getting started with MIDI. I just want to punch in some basic MIDI stuff. Well, use anything. Yes. I mean, there's nothing that won't do that, right? But if you're thinking about growing, right? If you're a young person building, on the first step of their career, and you don't see why Pro Tools is the industry standard, keep looking until you see. right? Keep studying until you see why people are making that choice. And if you disagree with them, disagree with them. But don't jump into the cheapest thing because you don't have a picture, right, of what's going on, because you'll limit yourself. There's a lot of folks, I think, in colleges that will gravitate towards what they learn first, graduate from college, being able to do anything in Ableton, and then somebody asks them if they can score a film for them, and they're like, I could. It's going to take 4 years, but yeah, I can.
Is there a link for that?
Yeah, great discussion today. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much, Juhani.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was great fun.
Thank you for joining. You're the first Pro Tools Answers guest.
Which means I'm honored.
Which means you're also the best one we've ever had.
Yeah. Don't have any more guests.
You set the bar incredibly high if we do intend to, if we do
thank you.
choose
Thank
to
you.
do so.
It's been great fun. Thanks.
So let's wrap it up then. All he's going to say is thank you very much to all of you guys for watching us. Thank you very much to Juhani and Andy and Anders. If you haven't yet done so, please subscribe to the channel. Please give the video a like if you've enjoyed what we've been chatting about. Head over to protoolsanswers.com. Give us a subscribe over there as well. We'd really appreciate it. And of course, if you have any questions about Pro Tools, you're welcome to go and join the Avid Pro Tools support users forum. We've got the link to that in our various channels, so you can go and interact with the community, ask them questions, and maybe we'll feature one of your questions on one of our shows. Thank you very much for watching us. It's been great to have you with us. Big thank you to Andy. That's where you say thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Andy.
Big thanks to Anders.
Thank you.
Massive thanks to Juhani.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to you for watching. We'll see you next time. My name's Dave. This is Pro Tools Answers, and we're out.